Hello, HERStorians. I'm your host, Heather Ashley, and welcome to another episode of Women of HERStory, a podcast dedicated to celebrating women who have made or are making their mark on our society. Today, I have with me Carolyn Gage, playwright specializing in reclaiming women's stories. We love that, specifically lesbian stories. Thank you so much for joining us today, Carolyn.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for asking me.
I'm so excited to chat all things theater. I am a theater baby, so let's launch right in. You specialize, like I just said, in writing non-traditional roles for women and shining light on the lives of lesbians whose stories aren't being told the way that they should be. What set you on this particular path of writing?
Well, there was sort of two things. One was my mother was very active when I was a child and encouraging me to read and read early. And she would go to the library with me and start pulling these books off the shelf. And I'm like, in school, the Dick and Jane stuff. And there was a series of little orange biographies. And I'm sure that they're full of lies. When I think of them now, the Martha Washington. But they were famous women, mostly wives of presidents, Dolly Madison, because it was the 1950s. Famous
Right.
women, wives of presidents. But I remember one of the first was Pocahontas, and it was intriguing. So I was like in first grade reading biographies of women. And I just think that sort of set me on a path for life. And then the second thing that happened was I was just really woke up from a deep sleep, as did millions of women in the late 60s. And the women's movement, particularly the reclamation, like the Jansen textbook, History of Art, was like this thick. I mean, it's like a phone book. And when I was going through college, it had no women artists. I know, right? And then, but so suddenly there's all this scholarship, and oh my God, they're brilliant historical women artists and so on. And, so that was exciting. It was suddenly that we were all waking up and like, they've stolen our history and it's accessible. We can find it. And the internet really helped with that. But that just really excited me. Like, I want to be in that wave. And by then, my career was theater. It's like, and I'm going to write plays because the lives of real women are very different from the narratives that are constructed,
Yes.
by our colonizers, which is true not just of men and women, but of anybody, indigenous or whatever. The colonizer, what is it? Until the lion learns to write, the hunter will control the story. It's like,
Yes.
so I was just like, yeah, the lion is going to write now. So that was very exciting to me. And that so many of these women with astounding stories of resistance, especially, it's like, I could have used that. Yeah, I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. And as far as I knew, that happened to almost nobody. And then in the late 60s, it was like, oh, 2 out of 3 women. Good to know. Why isn't this like, why don't we have a huge body of like feminist plays where we write about that as much as men like to write about war, And yeah, so that was, so those two things, like the early, and I was playing with dolls very early I'm autistic in an intensely autistic way. I mean, I don't know what other normal girls did, but I had 50 dolls and they all had names and huge histories. And I did BBC miniseries with these 50 dolls. When I played dolls, I would go into an altered state for 6 to 8 hours in the dollhouse, enacting huge dramas and lots of violence, and I mean, of course, now I know, oh, autism, big time. Like, my mother had to take the dolls away in the summer. I wouldn't leave the house. So I just got small dolls and took them out in the woods and did the same thing. But so I believe I was playwriting. That was playwriting, basically. And so the themes of my life, autism, feminism, they were set pretty early.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like for me, it in my playing with dolls, I had, like American Girl dolls who already had their backstory, right? They
Yes.
have their book, they have their
Mhm.
backstory. And I would then a lot of times uh, enact them playing with each other with their already established backstories. So that's so
Yeah.
interesting that and usually I feel like for me, like all my stuffed animals, right? All my stuffed animals, they had names, but all their backstories were linked to me. You know, it wasn't their
Yeah,
own
yeah.
backstory. So
Well, of course, yes.
that's that's so
Yeah,
interesting.
and I look back and my favorite doll, and I had dolls for a decade, and I think I was 13, and my mother made me put them away, and I responded to that by dissociating
Mm,
and just trying to get out,
mhm, mhm,
But yeah, don't do that. If you have an autistic kid, let them do their thing.
mhm,
But my favorite doll was one I'd rescued from the neighbors. Her hair had all been pulled out. And I think she'd, been written on with ink, and she was a survivor. She was
mhm,
clearly abused, neglected, and they didn't want her. And I'm like, I'll take her. And she was the heroine, and she always came through harrowing trials and triumphed. And I look back later, and she had a past that could not be spoken of. And at that time, I was a survivor of incest. I did not retrieve memories until I was of 33 or 32.
mm,
And I'm realizing the center of my narrative was a survivor whose story couldn't be told. And she was also a lesbian. I didn't know what a lesbian was, but she had nothing to do with the males. She
mm,
was a leader of the women.
mm,
And I'm like, isn't that interesting? Like,
mm.
I didn't even know my own history, but I was looking for the story that would validate what I could not see anywhere around me. And she was absolutely that pulled out hair and everything. She was a little warrior. It was like,
Mm,
she didn't look like anybody else. She'd been through something, and you just knew, okay,
mm,
yeah, she knows what's going on.
mm,
And she was my little avatar before I even knew who I was.
mm.
There was
Wow.
integrity in the doll play I didn't have in my life. I just
Mhm,
tried to look pretty and get popular boys to date me. My
mm,
living life, my outside trying to cope, mask the autism life was just like, okay, what's normal here?
mhm,
And I'll try to do it. And I'll try to do it really well.
mhm,
But when I was with the dolls, you could see what the real story was.
mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's so interesting because I feel like uh we all as adults, we tend to forget like how important like playing just playing and specifically with dolls and what all those types of things can represent in watching how people how someone plays with dolls, how someone interacts with an avatar, you know, like it's so interesting. We forget that that's an ability that we have when we're older. I think so many times because we're told, oh, you or you're too old to play with the dolls, you're too old to play with the this, with the that. It's okay to have your avatar. It's okay to have your thing that brings you extra comfort, whether or not it is quote unquote like childish or something that shouldn't be allowed. Because you had mentioned that you had to put the doll away. There's like, why can't you just have, I mean, I've got a big giant stormtrooper helmet on my wall because it
Yeah,
brings
yeah.
me, I love it. I think it brings me to a place of, I can look at it and it's, you know, it's obviously not the same as your association with your favorite doll, but it's things where like when we get older we should
Yeah.
still be allowed to play and to explore and have
But also,
items of comfort.
if you have an autistic child, and I was a high achiever, so I was diagnosed very late in life. But if you have a child that is just hours and hours of absorption, and it doesn't matter if it's stamp collecting or often the special interests of an autistic child are very specific, and you're just like, oh my God, that is not gonna, move the needle forward at all. And in fact, the thing is, whatever our special interest is, we will be doing it 24/7 without pay. We will shut down the field
Mm.
because other people are having they're having pets and partners and trying to buy a house. And meanwhile, I'm in the dollhouse because nothing in the outside world gets it for me like that. So
Mm,
when they try and discourage his kids, because it's like time after time, they'll take some weird, strange obsession thing, and you realize it turns into something in the adult world that's phenomenally lucrative. And they make a name
mm,
for themselves because, like I say, nobody else is packing in the hours.
right.
Nobody else is incentivized like we are. If it's a gift. And
Yeah.
the detail orientation and my plays, I've got 100 sheets of paper in the trash for every one that ends up in it. You know, I've got one play with 2 banker boxes full of historical notes, and I worked with that until you get it down to 120 pages. But it's like,
Mm,
um, I just it's the self reward of getting it
mm,
right or whatever. It's stuff that I'd say 80% of the work that goes into it is kind of the below the iceberg.
right.
1% of the audience that's highly knowledgeable will suspect the level, the vibrational plane of the intensity of what you put into it, the
Mm.
compression. And so you're like, well, that's a waste of time if only 1% is going to see it. It's like, but I'll see it.
But you'll see
I'll know
it.
it's there. I will know it's there.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that they can't take that away from you.
Yeah.
No, yes, if you're lucky enough to have a child with quote obsessions, which we don't call them that anymore, we say it's a special interest, get out of their way.
Mm.
Yeah, throw some money at that shit, like really. It's like this is
Lean
maybe
into it. Lean
this might
into
keep
it.
you in your old age. That they could well be supporting you with whatever that is,
Yeah.
30, 40 years down the line. Yeah.
That's yeah, I love that. I think that's so great. And that's such a um beautiful perspective, right? Everyone has perspectives bringing and to bring into life, right? And I think having conversations like this one where it's like just getting things like that out, because I don't know that I've ever actually heard someone articulate that before, saying let him have that focus, that thing. Because what's interesting is that if that type of inclination is shown in athletics,
Oh yeah.
nobody says anything.
Oh
They're like,
yeah.
yeah, they're obsessed with baseball. Put all the money into it. But if it's something kind of obscure that isn't necessarily mainstream accepted, right? Then I feel like so many times people are quick to say, well, that's weird. Have a normal hyper specific interest like football. And you're like, but I don't have that interest. I'm interested in the stories I tell with my dolls. Let me tell my
Yeah, and
stories with my
often it's
dolls.
often coupled with not wanting to be in school because school's not really on your special interest. It's
Mhm.
like let them get a GED and then go to community college.
Yeah,
All the hotshot schools will take you out of community college if you're impressive enough. So it's like you don't really need to graduate from high school. You
absolutely.
can go into a good college from the community college, save a barrel of money. But I mean, I feel like it's like, again, you've got some kid that's spending 8 hours a day on something you don't see how it's ever going to pay for itself, and they're wanting to drop out at 16 or 17. Watch that kid. That's going to be Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, because also the difference between, someone having like hyper specific focus in something that isn't necessarily academically related, right? Or athletically related,
Mhm.
perceived to be obscure. It that's a big difference between someone wanting to leave school at that point and then someone else who's just lazy, has no drive, has no focus, wants to drop out. And I think as a society, we've decided that if you don't want to complete education, no matter, or high school specifically, right? Because you can move on to something like community college where you can specifically go into what you're trying to work on. We've decided that if you have a GED, that means you're lazy and that you're not worth the time and that you don't care about anything, which everybody has different focus, different interests. Just because you want to leave school at 16 to focus on this thing that you've wanted to do your whole life doesn't mean you're not worthy or productive or just a human. It's so interesting though. We've decided what means you're lazy and uh you know out in the outskirts, and then what means you're productive and awesome. Like, it's such a strange black and
Mhm.
white thing that it shouldn't be. makes no sense. It makes no sense.
Also, I think if you're passionate about something, that's you're succeeding. If I am
Hmm.
able to do something I'm passionate about, it's always a success. And the way the world measures success, I mean, what does it mean to
Hmm.
succeed? For me, the masking, like when I was trying to be a heterosexual housewife, what does it mean to do that really well if I'm kind of a radical dyke? Do you know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Yeah, wow, score, big score. Like, or to, have learned to climb a corporate ladder was something that you have to go home and drink every night just to deal with it.
Honestly.
And it's
Ugh.
like,
How
yeah, just
miserable.
yeah. What does it mean to succeed in a failure, in failing yourself?
Hmm.
I just think
Exactly.
that's really, we need to, but somebody who's got blessed with a special interest and has found a way to do it
Hmm.
is just succeeding after succeeding after succeeding on
Absolutely.
their own terms.
Hmm.
And so yeah, but I think for the parents, that's a tough sell.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has to do with the idea of security, but I think also some people don't necessarily have that. There's so many definitions of success, there's just so many. Even within each field, there's so many different definitions of success within each field. You can, your name doesn't have to be in lights to call yourself a successful actor. Your name, there's so many definitions of it. And I also think at the same time, there are people who thrive on the idea of I just go, I sit at my desk, I work 9 to 5, I come home and I chill. And some people, that's their definition of success. And that's amazing. Congrats. But that's not for everybody. And hopefully we can come to the general consensus as a society that we can all, if we're all happier doing what we like doing and being quote unquote productive in our own way, then we're going to be better as a people. The happier you are, the better person you're going to be. So don't be miserable. Ugh. I hate that. I hate that. Makes no
Yeah,
sense.
it's true. It's true.
So it sounds like playwriting has pretty much come naturally to you.
I had a professor, Pauline Piotr, and she taught really old-fashioned structure. As I knew I told stories and all of that, but you need some chops too.
Mm,
And it was almost formulaic, but she taught a structure that I can apply that anytime a play isn't working and you put it up and it's like,
mm,
oh man, it's not working. Um, I have a structure from 35 years ago, freshman playwriting class. It's an amazing tool. I can go into any play and troubleshoot. And a lot of times people will be trying to patch up dialogue or this and that. It's like it goes right to the structural root of the problem because a play
mm,
a play doesn't have to have a happy ending, but it has to satisfy very deeply. And there are just structural things that need to happen, and particularly in a play where you've got a 2 hour framework, certain things must happen at certain points. It's very similar to a sporting event. The best sporting event you ever saw, it wasn't watching me and Martina Navratilova play tennis. No. It's where it's really evenly matched. It goes overtime and then overtime.
mm.
It's tied. It's the score, someone's coming from way behind and then goes way ahead. And then the those kinds of things. It's the same thing. I mean, plays are like spectator sports. They're not films. And that's why you have to have an intermission, which
Mhm.
is going away now and it shouldn't. People are tired. An hour of watching a play, they're going to get antsy if they don't have an intermission. And I asked one of my professors, why is it that we can watch 2.5 hour movies without intermission? And he turned around like I was an imbecile and he yelled at me. He said, because a live theater audience is working. And I never forgot that.
Mm.
It's like, yes, and it is different. And they do need a break. They are participating in creating in real time an imaginary world with you. And you respect that. And you freaking let them get up and go to the bathroom and just take an emotional break. Like, whew, all right. back to Act Two. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
intermission's going away. I have huge issues with that.
Yeah.
There's a real need. There's a tired audience. If you don't get their intermission, they're not tracking. It's like halftime.
Hmm.
Try a football game with no halftime.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not tracking. They're tired.
Yeah.
And they need that break. But I just love that I was blessed to have the right teacher, and she was
Mm.
using a really old-fashioned book. And when people would hire me for dramaturgy, uh, I'd go right to the structure, and they usually didn't want to hear that. A lot of times people hire a dramaturg, they want to hear the play is brilliant. And it's like, no, this has got a serious flaw in it, and it will never work. You can put the best actors in the world in it. It won't work because it's not doing the things it needs to do.
Hmm.
It's like me and Martina. We can be interesting, fascinating women, but put us on the tennis court. Nobody wants to watch that game.
Mm-mm.
That is watching me collect balls for, chase balls. Yeah, that's what but yeah, so that made a playwright out of me, just
Yeah.
that one class.
Yeah.
I felt like I could, I then had a product because it isn't just stage storytelling. Oh, let's just put it up on stage. It's just really like the sport. It has a specific structure. It has to do certain things. And I actually have a standard now where I know maybe my themes aren't that significant, but in terms of story, suspense, momentum,
Hmm.
I can tell if my plays work or they don't. And that's a gift because I find without a grounding in structure, you felt strongly about it, or you've got a great character and it just doesn't work. It's like,
Hmm.
I don't know what to do. It's like, but I do because this wonderful teacher. So I'm very
Yeah.
grateful for that.
Yeah, wow. I like the comparison drum, like the reason we can sit through like a 2-hour movie without an intermission. And it also, I feel like so much energy, right? We are water and electricity, right? And so when you are actually in a space with people who you can feel it, you're not feeling your own emotions like you are, um like, okay, let me see how I can articulate this, right? So like in a movie you watch and you cry because you're upset about your characters. It's a much more of a removed experience. But when you're in a live theater, this group of people will never ever be in the same room ever again in the entire world. It just will not happen. You will never have that collection of people there again. You will never have that performance again. That is, nothing ever happens the same every time because it's live, right? And so you have all these energies, and then the audience feels the character, right? You're not necessarily going based on your own experiences when you're watching a live play. You put so much of your own energy into each of these characters, each of these people, that it is exhausting. That's why after
Well,
you,
and anything can happen. I mean, it's like the difference between watching a tightrope walk that's filmed. It's on YouTube.
Mhm.
And you may actually, it's probably on YouTube because it's successful. They
Mm,
don't tend to put things up with ghastly endings.
mm.
But you're in a theater and good actors are doing a tightrope walk and good
Ooh.
play. The stakes are high. And the sense of like, I could be here tonight with all these people when there's an accident with no net.
Mhm.
And you feel that. It's like, it's just like with the sporting thing, like, no, like, or you're like, yeah, yeah, go, and when it's in the can, they could still fall, but it's different. You
Mhm.
you were not there when it happened and saw the
Mm.
energy change, and suddenly everybody's running around and watching it later. It's not the same.
Mhm.
You're part of it if you're there for that, and it does put you on the edge of your seat,
Mhm.
for sure.
Mhm.
I love live theater, and people are like, my early career, especially if they were gonna like considering dating me, they were like, so are you looking to move into film? I'm like, never. Which was like, it was a commitment to poverty and obscurity. And I could just see their eyes glaze over at the party as they moved on, like, loser, just like, yeah, but it's like, no, I would say I'm too good to do screenplays. Yeah, I'm too
Hot
good to.
takes with Carolyn Gage.
I know, I know. Well, I just lead with the autism. I feel like they'll just go, oh, that's her autism.
No,
So,
I totally get it. I totally get it. I like I said earlier, I'm a theater kid. I'm a dance kid. I'm definitely of the live performing arts. I just love them so much, and I understand completely that that's basically, I mean, I've signed my I'll be living in poverty forever, and
yeah.
I'm totally okay with it because, I'm not saying I wouldn't do film, TV, any of
Yeah,
that, but
people meet
my
you like they're scoping you for a potential partner. They're like,
yeah.
so are you going to be teaching? You're like, no, I just want to dance. And then they just, oh, wait, there's someone across the
My
room.
God. Yeah. Yeah. They're like, oh, you're a dance.
Hobby,
Okay. Mhm.
hobby. It's a
Oh.
hobby. And I'm like, yeah,
Mhm.
I do it 60 hours a week.
Right? Right? Where I'm like, "Oh, no, I've dedicated my whole life to this, this I'm like, I've put in more hours at the studio than I did at my own home." Like, I'm pretty sure I was around my actually not pretty sure, 100% percent sure that I spent more time at the dance studio with all my dance teachers than I did with my family. I'm like, yeah, okay, I put that much work into my hobby. No, like don't minimize it just because it's not a six-figure paycheck, that's so people
We should
don't
try,
get the
we
arts.
should have a whole club of people. We just go to the parties, you tell me what you do and usually drop what you make. I'm like, wait, are you telling me that you spend most of your day doing something that's just for money?
Yeah, yeah. For money and you hate it.
Yeah, really? Like, oh, I'm so sorry. Can you get a life coach or something? No, I know. A friend of mine would just say, she'd say, there's all kinds of paychecks. And I love that.
Mhm.
There are
Mhm.
all kinds of paychecks. And actually, the monetary one is often not the one that will really save your life if you're in the crunch, I think.
Mhm. Absolutely. What do you hope that people get from reading and or seeing your work?
Well, here's the beauty of live theater is like you're creating an alternative reality in real time and space.
Mm.
But you aren't in film. They can get up and go to the bathroom and have their boyfriend yell at them or whatever. In theater, it's like we're collectively doing this thing together. And for once, welcome to Planet Autism. I control the narrative, which I never
Mm.
do in real life. And I hope to generate an alternative paradigm to patriarchy using archetypes that are heavily censored, empowered female archetypes, and that for 1 or 2 hours they live with the vision that many feminists have in our hearts of like,
Mm.
oh, it could be like this. You can actually think like that. You can say things like that out loud, like that I am creating worlds that are heavily censored and
Mhm.
archetypes heavily censored. And I feel like um, audiences brought into that world, um, they just, the lights come up and they clap and where's my coat and I have to pee, so you wait for me in the lobby and all that. But something remains.
Mm.
It was an alien abduction and they're kind of amnesiac about big parts of it, but they were abducted for 2 hours.
Mm.
And they're kind of not quite this, something happened up there, and they're not quite the same. And maybe they'll be in a situation and suddenly they're like, hey, fuck you. And then
Yeah.
they're like, what? Oh, alien DNA must have kind of, wait, that
Mm.
before the abduction, I didn't talk like that. And so I kind of feel like that's what live theater can do. Film
Ah,
does not do it
yeah.
in any to the same degree. The power of live theater
Mhm.
is just incredible
Yeah.
because you're in that world. You're in that world. It's real. That's
Mhm.
reality for 2 hours, and it has such incredible potential for transformation.
Mm.
So that's kind of what I try to do is I try to get them to, yeah, like Caroline Casey, the astrologer, says, imagination lays the tracks for the reality train.
Mm.
And suddenly I'm laying it into territory that's spectacular. And hopefully, after the play is over, their train switches tracks a little bit and they're a little less compliant, a little more aware, a little
Mm.
more in touch, a little more wider range of possibilities for their life,
Mm.
dreams for their daughters, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love that. That's such a good analogy. Like they've been an alien abduction for a couple
Yeah.
hours. I love that so much because
Well,
that's
they
so
say that the people with the alien abduction, they say they're they don't know what happened. They don't have memory of it, but they're different when
something's
they come back.
different. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that feeling, like I've never been able to articulate like what that feeling is because there's there I obviously I'll say it again and again and again. I love theater. I love live theater. And the amount of times I've left a show being like, whew, okay. And you're like, not totally sure what just happened, but I think I need to call my brother. Like, or you're like, I think I need to call my aunt because I don't know why. I just have this feeling that I need to.
Yeah.
And the amount of times that that's happened to me after seeing a show that for no logical reason that I could articulate, you leave and you're like, I think I need to talk to these people right now, or like I need to not be around anyone and I need to just like sit with myself for a minute because I'm not sure and I need to process. And
That is the best thing when your show is over and there's no applause.
ooh,
And you just, for me, it's like count the seconds because those are the gold stars. And the
mm,
longer it is, because they're not ready to be here yet.
mm-hmm.
They are not, they're like, they're staying with the play. The furniture has been rearranged in their brain. They are not ready to like, oh, that was a lovely performance. They're like, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
that's a slice of reality I was not ready for, you know. And I love that silence when,
Mm-hmm.
it's so time for them to clap. And in the old days, I used to start clapping like, come on, people, that's the end of the play. And then I realized they know damn well it's the end of the play
Yeah.
and they are not ready. And then I had that happen to me with I think I saw it was the Harlem Dance Theater, and
Mm.
I think it was they were doing this Lizzie Borden thing, but my issues with my mother were huge. But anyway, like she's dancing with the ghost of her dead mother, and I'm riveted. I am like just files are dumping, like and the lights come up and I don't care. I don't know what that is, but I'm like, the stage is empty. I'm still there. So I'm just watching the stage. People are crawling over me and making suggestions that I should get up and move. And I'm just like, no, and I did that for half of intermission. I was not available,
Yeah.
for anything else. I was in that dance. I was
Mm.
like completely like, I think I was changing. I
Mm.
believe that I was transforming, and it was just
Mm.
like, go ahead and fucking step over me. I am not,
I won't be offended. Just walk around me. Walk around
I'm
me.
not going to be in your world for a while, and I'm not going to get out of your way, so you will have to step over me. I know, that was just a really blatant example. It was wet. It was 10 minutes after it ended, and I'm still like and I had a play where there's an attempted onstage child suicide from homophobic bullying. And this woman came to judge it for some big award. And so I knew who she was. We all know who she is. And we're watching her like, is she like it? Is she like. So then everybody's left the theater and she's still sitting there. And I'm like, "Well, So I go introduce myself and, yeah, autistic people trying to schmooze. That is a sad sight. So I'm trying to do that. And she just turns and says, my son killed himself.
Oh.
And she said, when I came into the theater tonight, there's a noose that goes up at this summer camp on the flagpole. So it's Act
Mhm.
One. The noose goes up. You're like, yeah, somebody's head's going to be in that.
Mm.
And she was like, she said at the beginning of the play, I thought, oh, I'm in the wrong play tonight. And when she told me that, and I said, I'm so sorry, I think you were in the wrong theater. And she said, no, because in my play, a successful intervention is modeled. The lesbian counselors take this girl, let her know there's not a damn thing wrong with being lesbian, and there's a lovely, these people are sick, not you. But I just remember she couldn't move. It was the
Mm,
play that could have saved her son's life. It was the model of a different reality.
mm,
He was not gay, but he had schizophrenia and he was treated. He was bullied a lot. But I remember she couldn't get out of her seat.
mm,
And she nominated. It was American. Wait, the ATCA. It was the American Theater Critics Association.
mm.
It's the top theater award of theater outside of New York. She put that play up for that award, and
Wow.
it was done in a tiny women's theater. And I was up against Steppenwolf, and I just when I saw the who I was with, it was like I just remember her sitting there, and she's like, "That was some shit.
Mm,
I saw some shit tonight." Yeah.
wow. I
But yeah, I love
remember,
that.
yeah.
I love it when people are transformed by your work. I
Yes,
really love that.
yes, yes, yes. This actually even makes me think of bringing it back to Charlotte Cushman. When they did Oliver Twist, and she was cast as Nancy. And so basically in the theater world, as you know, you obviously know this, but at that point specifically, if you were cast as the sex worker, that meant you were like lowest on the totem pole. You were getting like the dregs of the roles, and they were trying to ruin your reputation. And then Charlotte goes out and comes and just completely revolutionized the role and made people, they didn't even realize they were rooting for the sex worker. Like
Well,
the
one of
they
the things
forgot.
I found a review from the 1800s. I think it was after I read the play, and it was great because they described her first entrance as Nancy Sykes, and she studied these people. So,
Hmm.
you don't really know anybody of that poverty, degraded, drug addicted, prostituted. You don't, you have your own idea of what that entrance looks like. She was down there in Five Corners studying these women. She comes in with a hat that's like disgusting, beat up, greasy, just filthy. And there's a peg, and she misses it 5 times, which isn't even funny. Do you know what I mean? It's just like
Mm,
fucked up, like
mm.
heroin or something. So she misses it. And then she sits down with her walking stick and she's just observing things, and she puts the end of it in her mouth. Like nobody, just like and just starts kind of gnawing on it.
Mm,
And I just thought I would never come up with that. But as soon as I was reading it, it was like, oh my God. And you just kind of get the vacancy.
mm,
They're like, oh fuck, I can't even fucking my fucking
mm,
hat. It was like it just to me there was like it was just two gestures that they reviewed that, but it was like the hopelessness
mm.
and the utter, it's like why get out of bed? Why,
Yeah.
oh God, look, my hat won't even go on the peg, and then that wood thing. I'm thinking drugs. I'm like that's just
Yeah.
drugs.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was and so here people, like here's the whore.
Yeah.
And then that happens and they're like, I've seen these women.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is, only they're seeing them for the first time because it's a character on stage. It's like, that's not what a prostituted woman's supposed to look like. But deep down, they're like, oh, I've seen them on street corners. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they're sunk in poverty
Mm-hmm.
and often mental illness or a drug addiction. And that's what she was putting on the stage.
Mm,
And I just thought, and also when she was killed,
mm-hmm.
she's
Mm-hmm.
killed off stage, but she crawls back on cross-eyed.
Mm.
And again, that's funny almost, but it's not. It's traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
And she's like, Bill. I was like, that would upset me
Ooh.
so much. Like,
Yeah.
that's a real head injury. Like,
Yeah.
oh, fuck. That's like, oh my God. Because she's the beautiful prostitute being beaten to death. It's like, no, she's like,
Yeah.
it was a level of realism that people
Mm-hmm.
couldn't look away from. It
Mm.
was like, this is what we're talking about being beaten to death. This,
Absolutely.
and to her dying breath,
Mm-hmm.
she's like
Ugh.
believing in this man. I know, right? I just felt like, yeah, she rocked New York with that shit because it was in the devil's in the details.
Hmm.
And I think most actresses would be like, well, that gnawing on a walking stick, how's that going to affect the audience? She's like, I don't really care because that's what these women really look like.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing is it's not about, there was a review that I had read, um, that was like basically something about how like she left every part of herself outside. She only kept parts of herself that were, or for each character that she was ever portraying, she only held on to the parts of herself that would fuel the character in her performances, which is incredibly hard to do. I mean, it is so freaking hard to do that. And, but when you do that, you're not trying to be a different character, and you're not still being yourself. You're being the parts of yourself that identify with that character. And I think that is so powerful in being able to like change the perceptions of the people in your audience, right? Abducting them for 2 hours, helping them to do the same thing that you're doing, which is bringing parts of yourself into a character, into characters you write, into the women that you're bringing back into the spotlight, and telling the right stories and telling the actual truths of who they are. And it helps bring the audience along and be like, oh, I have a lot more in common with these people than I would have ever thought that I do. And that's such the beauty of live theater. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Have you ever doubted yourself
Constantly.
constantly?
Well, I think that I mean, I think that, if you're an artist, you're in a constant process of refinement, recalibration, purifying, if you will. I think you're constantly doing that. And to do that means you interrogate, does that still belong here? Is that something I need to get rid of? Could I do that better? Or like, yeah, I think that doubting yourself is good. And, you just, when I really doubt myself, sometimes I need to go in and change the work. And sometimes I'm like, no, they were wrong. Like, we were talking about that theater guy earlier,
Mm-hmm.
that, like people criticize your work. It's like, well, what do they know? And sometimes it's like, oh, yeah, they do know. And then
Mm.
sometimes, oh, it's a bunch of white boys. Yeah, no. And sometimes, when there's a famous opera star, Nellie Melba, and she was performing as a child, and singing. And her little girlfriend from school just couldn't wait to come up to her and say, Nellie, the whole time you were singing, I could see your drawers. I have thought of that story so many times because I'll put a play up and someone just can't wait to. I could tell that that actor didn't really smoke in real life. And at first I'd just be like, seriously? Because, some play I've turned myself inside out for. And then I just was like, when that little girl said, Nellie, I could see your drawers the whole time, she fucking dying of jealousy. You know it.
Mm-hmm.
You know it. It's just like, I could hardly stand that because you were so damn good. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like when they tell me that they could see my drawers the whole time, I'm like, gotcha, didn't I?
Mm.
You saw, yeah, you could not, you can't even deal with your feelings right now, can you? You just got to come over here and pee on my trees. So, I mean, I forget what the question was that you asked, but oh, doubting yourself. A lot of times, I think in my earlier days, it would be like, all right, I have to take that actor aside. We're going to work on that smoking. And now I'm just like, you are really jealous about something. Now, what is it?
Mm.
That actor probably blew you out of the water, or,
Mm.
something like that,
Mm-hmm.
or the subject of sexual abuse survivors has
Right.
triggered them. They do it especially, in my plays where survivors turn the tables and stuff. That
Right.
is when I get the I could see your drawers comments so
Right.
much. And it's
Mm.
because they just can't make their peace with the play. They're, you know,
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a old teacher, and he had seen Streetcar when it opened on Broadway, and he was a young man. It was the war and or post-war and all that,
Hmm.
and as a man, he beats his pregnant wife, and he said like he was just like ranting all the way out of the theater, like for blocks to his wife about it was the most disgusting play he ever saw. It was blah blah blah, and he said he got about 3 blocks down, and he stopped, and he was like, "That's probably one of the greatest plays in the American stage." And I thought, yeah, don't listen to talk to people a couple of days after if it's a really
Hmm.
powerful play, because I've never forgotten that story either. Like
Hmm.
he was triggered. It was, Tennessee Williams is a level of realism that we were really protecting ourselves from. That kind of situation, and then there's a rape at the end of it, and
Hmm.
he was just like, well, this guy's wrong. This, yeah, it's like, well, that's welcome to life.
Welcome to what happens in life
I
sometimes.
know.
Like, not all theater, there is value in the like pomp and circumstance and the like the jazz hands shows, and those are great. Those have absolute value. But then there has to be shows that are so real that you're so mad after, like you have to let yourself feel all those things and not criticize the writing in it, because then it's probably not that. If you feel that deeply, like give yourself a day and then be
Well, and,
like,
and I also think that a powerful play often it the audience is left with the problem. That
mhm,
play ends. Nobody's gone to prison. She's lost her, but she's the one that's taken to a mental asylum. I think it's been a
mhm,
long time, and that play certainly deserves criticism and another look at it.
sure.
Tennessee Williams was very turned on by,
Yeah.
um, I think, Stanley Kowalski, frankly, but
Mm,
I think that it's the problem.
mm,
My professor was left with a problem, and he wasn't used to that. And I think a lot of really good plays put the ball in the audience's court at the end. And that's why you leave just so disturbed and have to say, I could see your underwear the whole time. Like that's gonna somehow nullify
right.
the weeks of rehearsal and the intent, but it's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I won, I saw your underwear, I won. I could tell you don't really smoke. I won." I know.
Yeah, where it's like, what's the use in those? Those aren't constructive. Those aren't even actual, like, real things to be talking about, such as life, what's the point of saying that? That doesn't do anybody any good other than probably make you feel a little better because you got one on
Yes,
someone. Like,
clearly. I mean,
chill.
Nellie Melba singing at age 10 was probably clearly a genius. And it was
Hmm.
just like, well, I saw your underwear, so that doesn't count. Like, you know?
So you obviously do a lot of research on the historical subjects of your shows. Have you come across any information in the process that was particularly surprising for you?
Well, when you research the lives of historical women and you're called to write it, I don't know, it's a certain vibrational plane. You do come across astounding things that often feel like the key to the whole thing.
Mm,
And that's always a moment. It's like the universe is rewarding you. It's like,
mm,
all right, you've been such a good girl. Here's your treat. But yeah, and there's often like some small moment that cracks open the whole thing. And I just recently finished a play about the Texas tower shootings in 1966 at University of Texas, Austin. It
mhm,
was the first mass shooting as we understand it, because of course mass shootings with indigenous people are like,
right,
old news, but it was the first kind of contemporary mass shooting.
right.
And the woman I was writing about, Claire Wilson, it was an interesting thing. Like she had been shot, um, you know, in the hip. She was 8 months pregnant and she survived it, but she lay out on the South Mall. Nobody would come rescue her because
Mm,
she was in the line of fire,
mhm,
and the guy was not taken down for 90 minutes. So people watched her,
mm,
and this 100-degree heat. And, but she, just a little thing in an interview, like that when she went to the ER, she was insisting she'd been shot in the arm. And she was lucid the whole time and never had any lapse of memory. She has complete recall. And I thought, I've just built the whole character around that. She's bleeding out. She knows the baby's dead. She tells people the baby's dead. And it's a massive, I mean, it's exploded her pelvis. She's got bone fragments all over her abdomen. And, you know, and she's insisting she's only shot in the arm. And I'm a control freak. And I thought, that's a manageable narrative. If you're trying to keep yourself alive, that's a manageable narrative.
Yes.
Like my whole abdomen's been exploded is kind of like, and I'm bleeding out. That is not. And I thought, that's interesting. And she did survive it. But it's kind of like, I'm going to be all right because I've just been shot in the arm. It's like, you're lying there. And the blood is fucking. And so I built the whole character around that. It told me a lot about who she was. And it's just like, and in the same breath, she's also telling this person, if they come to get me, tell them I'm type A. So I'm like, yeah,
Wow.
dead baby, telling people your blood type, and then, but it's only a flesh wound. And it's like, but I just remember just that little moment thinking, there's so many things about that woman I know from that and she would demanding that they not cut her clothes off. You don't need to do that. This is my favorite dress. I'm only shot in the arm. And they're just looking like, your whole backside's missing. Are you crazy? Like, I know it's like, but yeah. And so a lot of times, because, if you're a playwright, that might be something you just be like, well, that's an odd thing to say. But for me, it was like, what is that about? And it's like, what that's about. Pick a narrative that is going to support what you're trying to do.
Absolutely.
And who gives a fuck if it's real or not?
Yeah.
Just hold on to it, So I don't know, but that's the most recent example. But yes, there's little things that surprise you in real life all the time, that are just little gems that you can build so much off of.
And then little gems where you're like, how was I not told this when we were studying this particular war in school? How come I didn't hear about Nancy Wake being a World War II spy and being freaking amazing? Sneaking people through to save them. Like, she was so crucial in the success, and how did I not?
And the ones we do hear about, like Anne Frank, because she's a child and a victim, and doesn't survive, but it's like, she's clearly lesbian in her journal. Oh my God, she's totally lesbian. How did that part not get? Well, of course, her father had taken it out. It was the unedited diaries later, but it's like, I think that personally, I think it's a big part of the story.
Yeah,
huge part of the story.
Huge.
Yeah. And I remember going to that house when I was 16. I was on a little high school tour in Amsterdam. We went to see the house, and she had cut out pictures of Deanna Durbin, who was kind of like Shirley Temple, kind of a contemporary, a little older. She had pinups from newspaper all over her bed, and they're not guys. I mean, she was like, she had pictures of women over on the wall above her bed, and again, the power of theater. It's like, here's this girl in absolute hell, and she's got pictures of Deanna Durbin, who was, Judy Garland contemporary, up on her wall. What did that mean to her? Did she think someday I'm going to do that, or I'm going to meet Deanna Durbin someday, or like, how much did that really keep her going? And like, boy, Deanna Durbin, I just think like that, that's, and then you find out she's lesbian. I'm like, Deanna Durbin, oh yeah. So I don't know. I just think, yes, what they tell you, what they don't tell you.
It's very much to make sure that certain people continue to feel like they have every opportunity in the world and they could do whatever they want. And then everybody else is going to be limited to figure A 5 sentences in the textbook. It's very deliberate who they choose and then what part of the story they tell. It's so interesting. That sort of information delivery service, if you will, right? It's just very much, these are the stories that fit the power construct that we have established.
But also, like, there's like archetypes, and like reading the historical record of Joan of Arc, and she's so documented because there was all these trials, and then there was this trial after she was dead, talking to everybody who ever knew her in any capacity, and it's like the real not wanting to wear women's clothes, literally dying for not wanting to wear women's clothes, which was related to sexual assault. But alcoholic father who basically told her she was a slut a lot, a very contemporary situation. Major eating disorder, severe eating disorder, to such a degree her soldiers would describe what she ate a day, like one piece of bread. That's enough to make you hallucinate. It's sort of like, but you're looking at her, it's like, oh, she's a little butch dyke with an eating disorder, because there's at least emotional incest and probably other kinds. Her father's drinking issue was documented in his behaviors. And I'm like, I know that girl. I think I might be that girl, because I know the archetypes in lesbian community. And it's a scrawny little butch. She's got a leather jacket 2 sizes too big, steel-toed boots, and she's playing pool, and she's so tough, and you just go, oh honey, where's your mother? Just so tough, and really not, just really. And I just feel like, because lesbian archetypes aren't known to people, they're discounting this, like, oh, okay, she doesn't eat very much, or she's like, yeah, her father seems to drink a lot, or and they're not putting it together, and they're not seeing, I know this girl. And also she was deeply in love with a girl. They used to sleep together, and that's documented. And then this girl, and Joan, meantime, her father set up an arranged marriage for her. She takes him to court. She does all kinds of stuff women do not do, especially teenage girls, because she's staying true. And her girlfriend gets married. Oh, she joins the military. It's like, I know so many women out of high school fell in love with a straight girl and went into the military. That's an archetype. And I'm like, okay, it's 1530 or whatever. And I'm like, oh yeah, incest, crushed out on a straight girl, betrayed, hugely betrayed. I broke my engagement. All the, I was just like, I know this girl. And so a lot of times that's what happens, is these details are all chopped up and in different places because they don't have a sense of the archetype, and then for me, it was just like, oh my, I know a dozen young women like this. Same story. So that's annoying, because the empowered sexual older woman, the this, the that, there's all kinds of archetypes that are disallowed where women are concerned. And so those details, like Rachel Carson never was with a man, and she slept with her college professor, she slept with her agent, which is a big reason why she was placed so prestigiously in the Atlantic Monthly, and on and on. She really curated who she slept with, and it was very helpful for her career-wise. And she's sort of taught like this spinster woman who's so in the world of science. It's like, oh no,
You're like, that's not it. Nope, that's not what it is.
But that's an archetype that they, it's sort of like serious scientist, hot mama. Like there's just, they can't. And I feel really angry that, so much lesbian history is missing like that. And the archetypes of older women who find their mission late in life, or their voice late in life. They sort of make you want to feel like in theater, after 35, your life is over.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's even for, like, obviously not to the same degree, but for, I feel like until The Prom came out, that recent musical, there wasn't like lesbian leads in a musical. They're
I
just,
have one. I have a lesbian
I
music.
mean,
I have
yeah.
several. But yeah, and
You know
it's
what I
a real
mean?
issue. Yeah, and the one I wrote is about Babe Diedrichson, who is called, do we say Miss, Mr., or It? I mean, that's how the press would refer to her. And she was very masculine. She was super butch. And
Hmm.
so um, I remember one of the top theater critics in Arizona, you know, I think he came to see a workshop of it or something, but he said, "You have subject matter here that's completely unsuitable for musical theater." And I'm like, no cleavage, no high heels, right? Masculine woman, athlete, and a chorus that looks like the Smith College rugby team. Is that what you're talking about here?
Wow.
Yeah, and that was what he was. It was kind of like we were talking about the Cushman play, where she talks
Hmm.
to the audience. It's like, I think that
Interesting.
yeah, that putting the lesbian on stage for somebody who's done 7,000 Fosse shows and the chorus line and the cleavage and all that,
Yeah.
and they're confronted with a lesbian musical. I think there's a real sense of discomfort
Yeah.
and a sense of I don't know how to direct this, and also a sense of I don't think I can cast this.
Mm.
Because you think of the chorus for a musical, those women are going to show up with their headshots and their resumes. It's like, can we make them look and move like the Smith rugby team? Can we
Hmm.
decolonize them
Yeah.
enough to commit to playing this?
Hmm. And what's interesting is on the other token, like, like Eugene O'Neill either wrote spinsters or prostitutes, spinsters and sex workers. Those were the only two roles he ever wrote for women in his plays. I mean, I think with the exception of like two, but like Iceman Cometh, the only women are sex workers who are vile. They're the way they're written are just vapid, empty people. And they're always dressed in boobs out and high heels. And it's like there's there and it is very
Well,
frustrating
the
that,
same thing with like
yeah.
Tennessee Williams. The women that he wrote were
Hmm.
I think they were kind of pathetic drag queens, honestly. I feel like
Mm,
his notions of gender came from
right.
intense gay male culture. And so
Hmm.
when he was writing women, he was writing these men.
Hmm.
Because I don't see women that I know or
Mm-mm.
relate to in Tennessee Williams. And then these monster mothers, that's a big trope in
Yeah.
gay male theater. Torch Song Trilogy does it, and it's like Kaja Fall does it.
Hmm.
And yeah, but yeah, there are limited archetypes, just such limited
Hmm.
archetypes.
It's
Yeah.
unfortunate. I'm even thinking about like Angels in America, which I'm I love that. I love that show. I think it's a beautiful show, but it's also I'm looking at it, differently right now as we're talking, and I'm like examining how these women are horrible.
Yeah, and actually,
Horrible.
my issues with that play just don't even go that deep. It's like, I think it was Tony Kushner's first play. It was workshopped on the West Coast before it went east. But he's writing his first play, and it requires the ceiling to break and an angel to fly in. Do you have any idea how I'm like, I mean, I was 15 years into my career before I had a set with a door that would open and close. I
Yeah.
just thought like a lesbian would never even bother. It's just a really great excuse to never produce the play, which nobody wants to produce lesbian work anyway. But
Mm,
I just the that entitlement.
mm,
No, that has to happen.
mhm.
And the expense of that, every night the ceiling breaks, and flying
Mm.
people in. You've got to have somebody. It's insurance. I mean, the whole thing. And I just feel like I felt angry. I
Mm.
felt like I I I had to just know I'm writing for Bare Stage Broad Daylight because I'm writing for lesbians and we don't have theaters. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of reasons for that. Gay men do, but we don't. And I just would remind myself the greatest playwrights in the world wrote for Bare Stage, Broad Daylight, Don't Worry.
Mm.
But I remember when I saw Angels in America, I was like, you privileged, entitled,
Yeah.
are you even aware?
Right.
You know, and I mean, I built my career on a one-woman show with a stool, and I brought the stool. So, you know, but no, just that the difference. That's
Sure.
gay male playwright and a lesbian playwright coming up at the same time, and
Yeah.
that just to me was that would be such a deal breaker. Anybody dramaturging me would be like, Carolyn, that's tens of thousands of dollars. You can't put that
Right.
in your play, not a first play.
Mm.
But it was gay
Interesting.
men, it was
Yeah.
AIDS, it was like, oh, we can get backers for this.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, I'm writing about sexual survivors, and every woman I know,
Mm.
I would say it was raids, rape, assault, incest, discrimination, and sexism. We all had
Yeah.
raids, but we couldn't leverage that kind of money because we were women. But
Mm.
it was, yeah,
Interesting. Yeah.
it
I hadn't actually like, wow, I'm doing a lot of re reanalyzing a lot of
but don't think that his ability
information.
to leverage that ceiling and that flying equipment is divorced from the way he portrays women in that play.
True.
There's a connection.
True.
You know, there's a connection.
True. True.
If he
True.
put a big empowered dyke at the center of his story, and you know, another musical with a butchy lesbian, Fun Home. But when I saw Fun Home, and I love the graphic novel, I was
Hmm.
on a committee that put it up for a National Book Award. I was all about that. But when I saw that, I'm like, well, it's really a gay male narrative.
Mm.
People are like, oh yeah, there's a lesbian play. I'm like, they leverage the money.
Yeah.
It's about a gay dad who suicides.
Yeah.
That's, I just felt like you know, I just suspect it would not have gotten production if it hadn't had an equally powerful, and there are many people who see it and say it's a gay father's story. They
Hmm.
don't even see it as a lesbian story.
Right.
Um, yeah, so that's frustrating for me because I don't put men in my plays. And I'm
Hmm.
like, yeah, let's see how far Fun Home would have gotten if it wasn't about a father.
Mm.
And more than that, a pedophile, and that gets sentimentalized enormously.
Right. Right.
It's like a footnote. The story is infidelity.
Hmm.
And it's like, no, that's its own story. This
Mm.
is a story about criminal sexual assault on multiple children.
Mm.
This is, you know, um,
Right.
it's like this is the Larry Nasser story. This is that Sandusky story. This
Hmm.
is, and that is not dealt with. It's like, no, it's the mostly the betrayal of the family's trust. I'm like, nope. And I came from a family where there was criminal sexual behavior, and you don't apply a model like that.
Mm-mm.
Like, Daddy, can you see me? Or it's like, as soon as it's criminal assault, you have to do some serious things in your brain.
Yeah.
You have to look at all that you thought you knew or all the sentiment, and you just have to tell yourself that's not appropriate anymore,
Mm.
you know.
Hmm.
But that play, survivors have a really hard time with that play because it sentimentalizes and is very reductive, diminishes. The
Interesting.
big thing is the betrayal of the wife, and she has a whole number about it. Oh, and some of them were children by the but footnote.
Yeah.
To me, it's like I'm married to a criminal. Uh, forget adultery. I'm married to
Yeah.
a monster.
Yeah.
That is the story. And there was never a thought of let's report him to the police.
Yeah.
Let's
Interesting.
divorce him.
Mm.
Let's
Mm.
all not have anything to do with him.
Yeah.
Nothing. It was the kind of the dysfunctional American dramedy. And I'm like, no, it's a
Hmm.
story that centers a pedophile.
Yeah. Wow.
Ugh.
Interesting.
But again, talking about the archetypes and
Yeah.
where is the survivor's perspective on that? Um, and I'm not saying that Bechtel's take on him, yes, it's her father, and she's not getting help with it. And this is her. When you write an autobiography, you get to sentimentalize your perpetrator because that's real. The
Right.
fusion with the perpetrator, all that, that's real. But when you put it on the stage, like this is the way we should all frame it, that is, I had that same issue with How I Learned to Drive. It was
Hmm.
kind of like, well, that part of him was gross, but he taught me to drive. I feel like we need to help our audiences move to late stage recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and it is confusing when parts of these pedophiles and predators, I'm sure Sandusky did awesome coaching sometimes when he wasn't raping.
Right.
You have to,
Right.
Larry Nasser may have been a good doctor in some regard, somewhere, somehow with some patients, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can't, you don't put those in the balance with it,
Mm-mm.
you
Mm-mm.
know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hmm. Yeah, and it also comes down to, you said you don't write um men in your place because you're focusing on the women that you're talking about.
I mean,
Um,
I will sometimes if that's part of the woman's story, but
right.
no, I'm not
But
interested in.
no one bats an eye when it's a play that's all men.
Mhm.
But as soon as you say, I'm doing a play, it's all women, everyone's like crazy about it. It even makes me think about with Ruth Bader Ginsburg with when they were like, when will enough women on the Supreme Court justice be
Yes.
enough? And she said, when there's nine, because nobody
Yeah.
cared that there have been nine men forever. And as
Yeah.
soon as I say that we want nine women, apparently that's not allowed anymore. Like an
Yeah,
entirely one,
there's a but it's not just gender. I mean, I remember when Lorraine Hansberry with Raisin in the Sun, and it's an all black play, and but there's one white person who's coming from a neighborhood association to try and talk them out of, can I buy back your house? Because we
Mhm.
didn't realize you're black. Big mistake. Um, and I remember, I can't remember, oh, what was his name? It was a very famous interviewer. All he wanted to talk about was her racism, in that the only white person in the play was this reprehensible neighborhood association person. And I'm like, again, it was like, Nellie, I watched your drawers the whole time. I'm like, seriously, that's all you saw? But it was like the shock of like, you're not, this isn't about me.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Do you realize there's nothing here that I can access?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing a positive reflection of myself in this play at all. And she's like, welcome to the black world.
Real,
I mean,
honestly.
oh, but she is, you can just see like she's just holding it together. It's just like
Hmm.
watching um, Anita in those hearings. It's like you can just see that fuck you total dick. And just like, uh-huh.
Were you like, are
And she
you
just
that
kept steering it
obtuse?
back to, this is about housing discrimination, and but the only white person in the, and she just keeps going back to the social justice issue. Like, I'm gonna pretend I didn't hear that or whatever, but I just thought, oh my God, what self-control. I mean, the insanity of it.
Right.
But I often, that's the kind of thing like, well, do you not know any nice men? It's like, this is the story that I'm telling here. I'm kind of doing the Lorraine Hansberry thing. I'm like, but what about the men? And in the second act, you'll notice that, I'm just like, I'm going to interview myself in my head and just answer the questions I wish you were
Yeah.
asking her.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing. It's like when colonized people begin to tell their own stories, that's the immediate pushback is,
Mm-hmm.
where's all the good white people? Don't you know any good white people? And I'm like sitting here talking to you, buddy, kind of wondering if I do.
Yeah.
I, no, he
I
was schooling her on her racism. It's astounding. But I just had so many experiences from men dealing with the gender politics that were mirroring that.
right.
Um, and
It's
you're
yeah.
just like, phew, yeah, they just can't sit through a story that centers women.
Yeah.
It's almost they're having an existential crisis. I think I don't exist as I'm watching this
Yeah.
play.
Well, it's
Yeah.
also, I mean, it even makes me think about like female superheroes and all that stuff, and it being like a really incredibly strong, like, I don't know, like if Captain America were a woman and everyone's like, oh, like, okay, Black Panther in the comics actually ends up being a woman after the anyway, but
I
so
didn't know that.
yeah, so it's one of the comics, actually,
I
comic
did not
books are
know.
really, really well. I mean, they run the gambit as far as representation and
I thought the film Black Panther was a revolution. I mean,
oh,
not just racially,
incredible.
but the roles for women. It
Mhm.
was like they were modeling a level of equality that I just don't even try for.
His
It was like,
warriors were women. Yeah.
oh yeah, and the respect that was shown to him, the scientists, the top scientists,
One
like
of them ends up being Black Panther, one of the warrior women, at least in the comics. And so what's interesting is people who don't actually really know where all the roots of these comics come from. There's even branches of Spider-Man that are women. There's all kinds of these alternate realities and
wow, that's
really
wonderful.
amazing characters that aren't being made into films because they're not about big strong men. And it's funny because as soon as the film industry tries to bring those characters, the general public who knows nothing about the actual basis of these comic books, like, this story has already been written, it already exists. This isn't just a fad
Yeah,
of people being like, women could be powerful. No, this is actually, these comics have existed,
yeah.
like, as far as specifically in this, like, let's say, like,
I did
Marvel.
not know that. I mean, I
Mhm.
really didn't.
There's
I'm
even there's so Deadpool, the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, there's a female equivalent,
Oh,
basically.
really? Oh my
Yeah, her
God.
name is Gwenpool. They're actually not related to each other, but her name is Gwenpool. She's a she's freaking amazing. She's hilarious. She's an anti-hero. She breaks the fourth wall all the time, making crazy jokes. And it's the same style of tomfoolery, if you will, it's that, but for whatever reason, one is getting picked over the other. Though I will say Deadpool did take Ryan Reynolds many decades to get them to produce it. But I digress. It's something where it comes back down to people are like, you can't have females be strong. And it's like, that these have already existed. Like, these are real and
Well,
you're
that's
just
where I think it's about the power of the stage because in other art forms, like women in the visual arts and women in music and even women novelists. But I feel like that in terms of the roles available for women,
mm,
there's just in theater, there's restrictions that have not existed in the world of novels for like
right.
40, 50 years. I'm
Yeah.
like, why is theater so incredibly retro around racial politics, age, gender? And I think because it's really powerful in a way that some of these other art forms are not, like the censorship,
Mm-hmm.
the need to censor so absolutely is just so intense in
Right.
live theater, and that has really baffled me. It's like the women's movement. It really isn't until the last 10 years I feel like feminism even caught up
Right.
in theater, and it's still in its infancy from what I see. So
Mm.
that's kind of yeah, it's weird because in all the other fields of the arts, like you say with comic books, we've been there for decades.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they get translated into theater, oh, we can't do that. And,
Yeah, which is so weird because the theater community likes to think of itself as this really progressive entity, and
no,
we are quite
no.
the opposite, like,
I
as a
can
whole,
remember when Driving Miss Daisy came out, and I was just is this the 1930s? And it got all these awards, and I was just like, I mean, to me, it was like, it was Amos and Andy, and I just was
Yeah.
like, am I crazy? I mean, whenever it was done, it was like the 1990s or something, but I was
Mm.
just like, no, come on, it's been 30 years since the civil rights movement. I just couldn't. It was so sentimentalizing of just raw racism and
Yeah, it's very
but
strange.
I just like the things that happen on Broadway are just like and revivals, revivals of just the worst, the worst, like just things being revived that should never be
Right.
revived.
Let it
The
sleep.
gender
Let it go away. That
Pretty
could have,
Women. Oh yeah, let's make it a musical because that's going to make it all right. And that was just a few years ago.
yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, Pretty Women. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody knows that's just. I mean, how many young girls decided prostitution was like a real way to go? I mean, I just think that's a really harmful,
Hmm.
utterly just terrible narrative.
It is rather bizarre, and they tried. There are a couple catchy tunes in it, but for the most part I was like, why are we telling this story again? It's already been told. It's already a weird story to tell in the first place. There's a whole lot of weirdness that surrounds the movie itself anyway, and it's like, why is this the story that we decided was worth putting millions of dollars into? Like, why is it this one? And they did write some really interesting little interwoven relationships amongst various people that I did enjoy. I was like, oh, I haven't, that's nice. But for the most part, I was like, why is this the story that's being told? Why this one? Why this one? There are so many amazing shows that are in the works that like
Well, I
deserve
think
that type
in
of
terms of,
funding.
I just did a panel with Melissa Farley about prostitution in the Nordic model. I'm a big abolitionist, but in my industry, it's a Sweet Charity, Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, Pretty Woman. It's like there is again a real control of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it can occasionally be bittersweet, like Sweet Charity,
Mm.
but for the most part, I mean, it has nothing to do with prostitution or prostituted women. And yet a lot of
Right.
people draw their ideas about it as sex positive. I can't think of anything more sex negative than selling your body, selling access to your body for sex that you don't want to have. You're not
Right.
turned on. You didn't choose this partner. He usually is disgusting because, for starts, he's buying you. So, right
Mhm.
there. I think I just feel like that my industry has blood on its hands in terms of looking at
Mm.
well, just
Right.
sexual exploitation of women in general, but specifically prostitution and but any like just doubt
Hmm.
about the priesthood scandal. What play about the priesthood scandal is going to make it to Broadway?
Right.
One that's called Doubt? There's no doubt.
Mm.
There are uh, tens of thousands
Right.
of victims, and they have the same narrative. It's like there's no doubt, and this is not a story of like, sometimes children can be, and the same thing with when sexual harassment in the academy goes to Broadway. Oleana. It's those dykes over in women's studies that are brainwashing her into ruining this
Hmm.
good man's. It's like that is never
Yeah.
the narrative.
Right.
And I know dozens of victims, and I dropped out for 10 years because of sexual harassment. It's like,
Hmm.
no, that's never the narrative. Neither
Right.
is doubt in the priesthood scandals. I mean, this perpetrator apologist, perpetrator protectionist narratives in theater are
Hmm.
just the norm. And
Mm.
anyone who tries to challenge that, and what we get is how I learned to drive or fun home, and oh, that bittersweet daddy, look at me.
Mm.
Ugh,
Hmm.
I'm just oof, it's like
Right.
yeah.
It's more detrimental than it is, you know, in aiding the uh,
It makes you feel so invisible. Like what all these good
mm.
daughters, like how I learned to drive and fun home, these are the mature women and they just kind of chalk it off like, oh, that's painful. It's like some of us have spent our lives trying to take our fathers to court.
Mm.
Some of us have, it's like some of us have, been that was an upper middle class family.
Right.
Some of us have just known we're going to be disinherited and done
Mm.
it. I was disinherited by my perpetrator
Mm.
because I confronted. And I feel like it disappears us Because this is if you're really mature, this is you just sentimentalize it, and it's like it's a little quirk of his, or oh,
Right.
I don't think it was even personal. There's just no advocacy and no understanding. It's criminal
Mm.
assault,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that is where. Now, Fun Home upset me so badly. Gave it a standing ovation because everybody in the theater stood up and clapped. And at that point, I was so traumatized. I felt if I stayed in my seat, it was like everybody would look at me and
Mm.
know I was an incest survivor. I just remember thinking,
Right.
what's the easiest thing? Just stand and clap and go home and write a blog about this. And that's what I did. That was all I could do. I
Right.
was terrified. When I saw that everybody in the theater adored that narrative, I knew they wouldn't want mine. I knew that
Mm.
my incest experience was wrong and bad, and my response to it was wrong and bad, because this is the right way to deal with it, is to sentimentalize it. And
Mm.
so I feel like we're really harming survivors, which is to
Mm-hmm.
say, 1 out of 3 of the women in the audience, when we do this, it's not
Yeah.
a victimless crime. When we put up the best little whorehouse in Texas, or Pretty Woman, or you know,
Mm-hmm.
the rape narrative that made it to first class production extremities was just obsessed with, gosh, what will women ever do if they ever get their hands on the rapist? And I'm like, I know thousands of women who've been raped. Never once, never
Yeah.
once do I ever remember that being a topic.
Right.
How am I going to stay alive another day? That's a topic.
Right.
What am I going to do with him if I ever get my hands on him? Never,
Yeah.
never.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's not.
but so I look at that play and it went to first class and it got funding. That's who is interested in that question?
Mm.
The perpetrators.
Yeah.
That's who's going to fund that.
Absolutely.
That's a compelling issue. Oh, if they catch me, what will they do with me?
Mm.
I could care less. Raped
Yeah.
women could give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
I know. It's
Yeah.
kind of on a rant. You see, you interview somebody autistic. Well, I don't want to
No,
generalize,
well, and
but
it's
I will
also
go into rants.
well, I'm
On
a
my
yes.
subject, just rant.
I'm a yes and person. I'm like, yeah, this is where it's going. Well,
But
let
that's true. I'm talking some shit here.
I
This is
know
true.
that's the other thing. And I'm like, ooh, spill the tea, bring it on, because it's gotta be told, nobody talks about it. Nobody's saying.
And I'm also like, I'm 70. It's like, oh, what are you gonna do? Not produce my plays? Oh wait, that was the last 35 years, I think. Yeah. I'm like,
Yeah.
fuck
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Just go
Air
ahead.
it
Don't
out, let
produce
it
me.
out. Yeah, and you never know who it's going to resonate with, and who's going to hear it as a call to action, like it could light this conversation. Someone listening could light a big fat fire in their belly, and they just hear it as a call to action to
I
like
just say, all
do
you
it.
survivors out there, especially early recovery, Heather and I, we see you. I've
Mm-hmm.
got the plays for you. You are not crazy.
Mm.
They are actively trying to appropriate the narrative in which you look like you're not doing your rape right. I just want you to know I see you. And if you are alive and sentient, you're doing it right. You're doing it really well. And don't doubt yourself.
Mm.
We see you, and your truth is just too hot to handle, and
Yes.
sometimes too hot for you to handle. We need each other. Email me and I will send you any play you want free, the PDF, of course. But yeah, I see you. I see you, and you're
Mm.
not sick, bad, crazy, or wrong. And
Mm-mm.
these perpetrators are criminals. I
Mm.
don't care if it's your grandfather or your uncle.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have Thanksgiving dinner with them.
Mm.
Don't don't do anything for the sake of inheritance. It's
Mm.
not worth it. Been there, done that. Not worth it. No regrets.
Mm.
There are powers in the universe that will hold you up when you walk away from the hush money.
Mm.
I see you. I see you, and I love you.
Mm.
And you're going to make it. Just
Yes.
look for your sisters. Heather
Mm.
and I, we got you.
We
We
got
got
you.
you.
Always.
Yeah.
I think a really good question to ask now would be, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Early on, I think it was a guy who wrote for TV, but he's like, write something every day.
Mm.
Doesn't matter what it is, write something every day. And then I have 26 years in Al-Anon because I live in a crazy world. And every single piece of Al-Anon wisdom is all like dog-eared. I mean, I have used the slogans. I have like, I'm really uncomfortable with what's going on right now. Because prior to recovery, it'd be like, what the fuck? Or I'd just be like, uh-huh, yeah, that's right. I think I'll just go home and blow my brains out. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, Al-Anon is the best advice. Every single thing they ever taught me has been just
Mm.
saved my life. But write something every day is not bad, and then you don't worry about the quality of it. Doesn't matter.
Mm.
Bad
Yeah.
day, good day, writing shit, writing genius, doesn't matter. The main thing is you tick the box. I
Yeah.
wrote today.
And I bet that gives, no matter the day, even like you said, I feel like maybe it helps to, I'm just kind of spitballing here. Maybe it helps to not be precious with your writing, right? Because if you're
Oh
writing
God, yes.
something every day, you're not sitting there being like, putting yourself in a position of, I have to finish this chapter, whatever, today, right? And then you become precious with your work if you're only able to produce work when you're in a particular mood. So then you
Yeah.
become more precious with it. But if you're writing every day,
Well, it's like, it's, what is it they say? It's perspiration, 1/10% inspiration, and the rest of it's perspiration.
yes.
And I think that it is a discipline. Writing is a discipline. It's a discipline not to judge yourself. It's a
Mm,
discipline to just like, well, that sucked, but you know what? I'm going to put another 2 hours in tomorrow, and it'll change. It'll get
yeah.
better.
And sometimes, fresh eyes are so important too. Like maybe, in the 2 hours you wrote and you feel like everything was just terrible, but, you wrote. So then the next day you look at it and you can be like, it wasn't all bad. Like this little nugget right here, I can use this. This is great. And then,
That was another piece of great advice from the same guy who said, write every day. He said, finish everything you write. And he gave an example of some screenplay idea he had, and he realized well into it, it was stupid. It was about robbing the World Bank, but the World Bank is kind of an abstract thing, it's not a
right.
building. And he just realized it sounds cool, and it is totally not. He forced himself to finish it knowing it didn't have the foundation. It's like, let's build a mansion on a foundation that we know is going to make it fall apart. And he said, you learn not to ever do that again.
Mm,
And I thought, yes, and I have done that. I have made myself finish everything I started.
mm,
It makes you it makes you much more careful when you start. If you
mm.
know, I will make myself finish this. So, you look at those foundations like, I don't want to waste my time. Is this a robust enough foundation to build a play on?
Mm.
Yeah, I have written all the way to the end plays that I knew these are terrible. I'm still going to make it the best I can, but I know it's not a viable life form.
Mm.
Um, that was great advice. He says, otherwise, you write up to your obstacles and then you always go home. You
Mm.
don't ever clear them. And that was brilliant. And that takes doing a project that you know you won't like and is hopeless and seeing it through to the end. You will learn things about yourself. You'll learn things about your craft that sitting down and having a stroke of genius will never teach you.
Mhm.
Finish everything you start, even when you realize. And sometimes I would realize it's hopeless and keep going. And I actually was able to solve the problem way down the line. But I was only still working because I have that discipline of
Right.
I will finish everything I start.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, it's like they say, it's another form of like learning a new way to not do something. Failure is a construct. It's not real. Failure is just learning a way to not do it that way the next time.
And also
It's
failure, it's only stamped failure when you quit. Otherwise, it's in
exactly.
progress.
Hmm.
So you're the one who pulls the
Exactly.
plug on it. You get if you don't ever quit on something, it can never be called a failure. I don't
Hmm.
know. That's a little trick.
Hmm. Hmm. So before we get to our last two questions, is there anything else that you want to add? Anything we didn't talk about, where we can find you and your work? Anything like
Oh,
that?
well, Google Carolyn Gage, Gage. It's www.carolyngage.com. My catalog is online. And if you cite this interview, I will send you anything that you ask, book or play, on request as a PDF. Um, but you can order everything that I've written as a paperback, and they're all everywhere. They're on iBooks, they're on Amazon, they're on Kindle, they're Barnes and Noble, but you can buy directly from my web storefront and I get more money. Paperback, download the PDF, ebook, and then a Kindle. So
Love
all
it.
kinds of ways to read the work.
Perfect. I love that. Well, I ask the same last two questions to everyone that comes through the podcast. First, what is your second favorite color and why?
Oh, brown, and it's kind of paired with the first, which is blue. And I think it's
Hmm.
like brown to me is it's not as, blue is my favorite, but the brown with the blue, brown is really earth,
Mm.
grounding, comforting. It feels warm. I love a really rich brown with kind of red tints to it. Just
Mm.
I love brown. Brown is beautiful.
That's
And,
so, you
when you on that day when the ocean is such a pretty color and the brown of the shore is and the
yeah.
rocks, yeah, brown and blue are just can't be beat.
Oh my goodness. I think you might be the first to say brown. And last, what in your opinion is the best part of being a woman?
Oh, sisterhood.
Mm.
Just the secret language of females. Because I toured for so long just in women's communities
Mhm.
of women, and the way that women talk when we're among ourselves. Just I love being a sister in
Mm.
a sisterhood.
Mhm.
Um, and that really didn't happen until the women's movement, and it changed. So Grace Paley said, when everything changed so fast.
Mm.
Yeah, and I found my voice, I found my people, I found my tribe, I found my narratives,
Mm.
I found my history, which was deeply buried. And
Wow.
I um, love being lesbian. I love being a tribe of lesbian, and I love being an autistic woman diagnosed late in life. That's a
Mm.
particular identity, and I love being in communities of survivors. I feel like we see the world differently,
Mhm.
and the creativity and the resourcefulness and the resilience of survivors is just a constant source of inspiration to me. And
Yes.
writing for survivors is the greatest privilege I can ever imagine.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, so that is the best part for sure for me,
Wow.
sisterhood.
I love that. And that's so true. And I think it's also important. I love that you said that you really found your voice, who you found deeper understanding of who you are, especially as you discovered more things about yourself and your past and what you wanted to do with that information in moving forward as a survivor. I think that just makes so much of what you do even more powerful. Like, you're already doing amazing work. I just so love the intent and the message behind just your mission as a playwright, as a creative, as a person. And it so deeply aligns with everything that we're doing over here, which is another big reason that I was like, oh my God, we have to have her on the show. This is perfect. But I love that you said that it can happen later in life, if you still don't know who you are or what you're about, and you're 30 something, 40 something, whatever, it doesn't matter. You still have time to find your people, to find who you are, to find what you want to do, what you love doing. Like, what is the point of what you're doing, you know? And I
Yeah.
think that's beautiful. That's so important because it's never too late for anything, ever. It's
Yeah,
not.
that's true. It's very true. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I feel like we talked about so many things that don't get talked about, and I love being able to gain new perspective and insights into really what goes into writing the way you write and why you do it and how you do it. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to sit down and have this conversation.
Oh, it was a privilege. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing it online.
And thank you, HERStorians, for tuning in again. I hope you guys loved this one as much as I did. Tell all your friends, follow, subscribe. You know the drill. You can follow us on our social medias. We are all over the place. We are on Instagram at Women of HERStory Podcast. We're on Twitter at the HERStory Pod. We're on TikTok at Women of HERStory. We have our website at ofherstory.com, and you guys know you can find us on our Anchor platform for all that other good stuff. Until next week, be safe, stay healthy, and show the world what you're made of.